Enzo Bellini stepped into the hallway outside his own study at exactly 9:51 at night, and the first thing he heard was not his fiancée's voice calling his name, but her voice, hushed and shaking, telling the housekeeper something he was never supposed to hear. "I can't keep doing this to him, Rosa," Elena said, the phone pressed so close to her ear she hadn't noticed the call had never fully disconnected. "Every report I send Crane, every little thing I write down, is another piece of Enzo I'm handing to a man who wants to bury him." Enzo did not move. He did not breathe. For 4 months, he had believed his fiancée's silences were simply shyness. He had never once considered that her downcast eyes at dinner were the weight of a woman carrying a betrayal she despised. One word from the next room stopped him cold entirely: "Sam." She said her brother's name the way a person says a name they are terrified of losing. He stood in the dark hallway, one hand braced against the wall, and did not make a sound. "Before we begin, tell me in the comments what state you are watching from. I would love to know. And if this story touches your heart, please stay with me until the very end." 4 months earlier, the engagement had been announced at a dinner Enzo did not choose the guest list for. His father had died the year before, and with him went the old, careful balance between the Bellini family and the man who circled Chicago's west side looking for weakness. Alderman Wallace Crane had been the one to suggest a match, a union, he called it, between the Bellini shipping interests and the Marchetti family's old political connections, a handshake dressed up as a wedding. Elena Marchetti had walked into that dinner in a borrowed dress, her spine straight, her eyes giving away nothing. Enzo had expected a debutante. What he found instead was a former pediatric nurse who had left her hospital job 8 months earlier without explanation, who flinched at the sound of a champagne cork, and who answered every question about herself with a version of the truth so smooth it took Enzo weeks to notice how little of it was real. He was not a man who trusted easily. He watched her the way he watched every new variable in his business, carefully, patiently, waiting to see which way she would move when no one was looking. What he saw, in those early weeks, contradicted everything he expected of a woman marrying him for convenience. She learned the names of his household staff within days and used them without being reminded. She noticed when his driver's knee was bothering him before the man mentioned it himself, and quietly arranged for a specialist. She never once asked him for money, jewelry, or anything at all, which, in Enzo's experience, made her the only person in his adult life who hadn't. He never told her he'd noticed any of it. He was not a man who said such things aloud. Instead, he began sending the good car for her Thursday errands, though she never asked why, and made sure the kitchen kept a running supply of the ginger tea she drank when she thought no one was watching her hands shake. There were other things, too, that Elena never saw. When her father's old sedan finally gave out on the Dan Ryan one rainy evening, a replacement appeared in the Marchetti driveway within the week, paid for through a dealership account that led back, if anyone had bothered to trace it, to a Bellini holding company 3 names removed from Enzo's own. When the heating went out in the small apartment building where Sam's favorite nurse from the children's ward lived, it was fixed within 48 hours by a contractor who told the landlord only that the repair had already been settled. Enzo did not mention any of it, not once, not even when Elena thanked the wrong person entirely for a kindness she never traced back to him. He had learned, in a childhood spent watching his own father hand out favors like currency to be collected later, that the only gifts worth giving were the ones that expected nothing in return, and he found, to his own quiet surprise, that giving them to Elena felt nothing at all like the transactions his father used to make. He watched her most closely at the dinner table, where 4 months of careful conversation had taught him the particular silence she wore whenever the subject of her family came up. She would answer questions about her father with practiced ease and questions about her brother with something closer to grief dressed up as normalcy. She never once mentioned the second phone. She never once let her guard fully down, not even with Rosa, not even, Enzo suspected, with herself. Rosa Delgado, the housekeeper who had worked for the Bellini family since before Enzo could walk, became the one person Elena trusted with anything real. It was Rosa who noticed, before anyone else, the second phone Elena kept hidden in the lining of an old coat, a phone that rang only once a week, always at the same hour, always from a number Elena answered in a different room with the door shut. "You don't have to tell me," Rosa said one evening, folding linens in the laundry room while Elena sat pale and silent nearby. "But whatever it is, Major, it's eating you alive." Elena only shook her head and said nothing, the way she always did, and pressed a small dried flower, the last one from her mother's garden, kept folded inside her grandmother's old prayer book, flat between her fingers until the ache in her chest passed. 3 days later, at exactly 9:51 on a Tuesday night, that second phone rang while Elena believed she was alone in the study, and the call that followed would not stay contained to the room she thought she'd closed the door on. Enzo did not confront her that night. He was not a man who acted before he understood the whole of a thing, and what he had heard was only a fragment, a name, a fear, a woman apologizing to a housekeeper for a betrayal she clearly hated committing. He went back to his own room and lay awake until dawn, turning the name Crane over in his mind like a stone he couldn't quite place. By morning, he had already begun making calls of his own. What he learned over the following days came together slowly, the way a bruise rises before it colors. Salvatore Marchetti, Elena's father, had spent the last 3 years losing money he did not have in card rooms Crane's associates quietly ran. The debt had grown past anything the family could repay through ordinary means. Crane had offered a solution, not forgiveness, but a use for the debt. Elena would marry into the Bellini family, and in exchange for small, regular reports on Enzo's shipping schedules and warehouse locations, her father's debt would be forgiven a little at a time, and her younger brother Sam's leukemia treatment, $12,000 a month at a hospital that did not accept excuses, would continue to be paid. Crane was not a man who threatened with fists. He did not need to. He was the director of a children's medical foundation with his name on 3 hospital wings, a man photographed at every gala shaking hands with mothers whose children he was, in Enzo's case, quietly using as collateral. His cruelty wore a very good suit and never once raised its voice. Enzo understood, by the end of that week, exactly what kind of trap Elena had walked into, not for greed, but for a 10-year-old boy in a hospital bed who called her every night to ask if she'd found him a new comic book yet. He did not tell her what he knew. Not yet. Instead, he began, quietly, to build something Crane had not accounted for. The first thing Enzo did was arrange, through a shell donation to the same hospital, for Sam's treatment to continue regardless of what happened to Elena's father's debt, routed so carefully through 3 separate accounts that not even the hospital's billing office could trace it back to a single name. He told no one. He simply made a call, transferred a sum, and hung up before anyone could thank him for something he had not admitted to doing. Before he told Elena anything at all, he went to see the boy himself, unannounced, on a Wednesday afternoon when he knew she would still be at the estate handling wedding correspondence. He found Sam propped up against a mountain of pillows on the pediatric oncology ward, a comic book open on his lap and an 4-line taped carefully along the back of one thin hand. "You're the Mafia guy," Sam said, not looking up from his comic. "Elena talks about you sometimes. Not the mean stuff people say on the news. The other stuff." "What other stuff?" Enzo asked, pulling a plastic chair up beside the bed. "She says you notice things nobody else notices." Sam finally looked up, studying him with the frank, unguarded attention only sick children seem to retain even after everything else has been stripped away by hospital hallways and needles. "Is that true?" "Sometimes," Enzo said. "What have you noticed, lately?" Sam considered the question with unexpected seriousness. "That Elena's been less scared this month." She used to check her phone like it was gonna bite her. She doesn't do that so much anymore. He shrugged, the gesture too old for a boy his age. I don't know why. But I like it. Enzo did not tell Sam why. He only stayed another 20 minutes, talking about the comic book and nothing of any consequence at all, and left before Elena ever knew he had come. The second thing he did was ask Elena, over a quiet dinner 2 nights later, about her brother. She went very still. How do you know about Sam? Rosa mentions him, Enzo said, which was true enough to be believable and gentle enough not to frighten her. He sounds like a good kid. He is. Something in Elena's face cracked, just slightly, at the mention of him, the first unguarded thing Enzo had seen from her in 4 months. He's the only person in my life I've never had to lie to. You lie to a lot of people, then, Enzo said. It wasn't an accusation. It was quiet enough that she could have let it pass. She didn't. Everyone in my life lies to survive something, Enzo, she said, and there was an exhaustion in it that went bone deep. Some of us just get better at hiding which parts are true. He wanted, badly, to ask her outright what she was hiding. He didn't. He had learned enough about patience running a business built on other people's silence to know that trust extracted by force was never trust at all, only fear wearing its clothes. 2 weeks later, Crane requested a private meeting at his downtown office, ostensibly to discuss the wedding arrangements. He greeted Enzo with the warmth of an old friend, offered him coffee from a machine that cost more than most cars, and spoke for 10 minutes about civic partnerships before he finally arrived at the point. I understand your shipping contracts with the Port Authority are up for renewal next quarter, Crane said pleasantly. I sit on that board, as you know. These things can move quickly, or they can move very, very slowly. I'd hate for anything, personal or otherwise, to complicate what should be a simple renewal. That sounds like a threat, Wallace. It sounds like friendly advice, Crane said, smiling the smile of a man who had never once been made to answer for anything. Family matters can get complicated. Debts, obligations, all mistakes people made trying to protect someone they love. Best not to let any of that spill over into business, don't you think? For everyone's sake. It was not a raised voice. It was not a fist on the table. It was, Enzo understood as he rode the elevator back down to the street, a warning wrapped so carefully in civility that a jury would never convict Wallace Crane of anything at all, which was precisely the point. That night, Enzo made a private, unspoken decision, one he did not say aloud to anyone. Whatever Crane was using Elena to hide, whatever leverage the man believed he held, Enzo intended to strip it away piece by piece until there was nothing left for Crane to threaten either of them with. The chance to prove it came sooner than he expected, at the Foundation's spring benefit, a black tie fundraiser at the Drake Hotel that Crane hosted every year to burnish the image the newspapers loved so well. Enzo and Elena were expected to attend as the newly announced couple, the union of 2 old Chicago names, and Crane made certain the seating chart placed them close enough to his own table that the photographers could catch it all in one frame. Crane found a moment alone with Elena near the bar, away from the cameras, his voice dropping the practiced warmth it wore for the room. You've been quiet lately, he said. No reports in 2 weeks. I hate to think our arrangement was slipping your mind, given how much is riding on it. I've had nothing to report, Elena said, her chin steady even as her hands were not. Then find something, Crane said softly, and it was the softness that made it terrifying. Sam's treatment isn't cheap, Elena. I hate for a lapse in your end of things to cause a lapse in his. She said nothing. She simply turned and walked back toward the ballroom floor, her spine as straight as it had been the night Enzo first met her, though her eyes, for one unguarded second, betrayed exactly how close to breaking she was. Enzo watched all of it from across the room, close enough to read the shape of the conversation even without hearing every word, and understood, with a cold and total clarity, that the woman he had spent 4 months quietly falling for had never once been the threat in this story. She had only ever been the one being used to build it. He crossed the room and found her by the terrace doors, the cold night air doing little to steady her. "You don't have to tell me," he said, echoing, without knowing it, the exact words Rosa had used weeks before. "But I already know most of it, Elena. I've known for 2 weeks." Her face went white. "Then you know I've been feeding him information about your business. You know I agreed to marry you as part of it. I know you've been protecting a 10-year-old boy from a man who thinks children are collateral," Enzo said. "That's not the same thing as betrayal, and I think you know that, even if you haven't let yourself believe it yet. He'll cut off Sam's treatment the moment he thinks I'm no longer useful to him," Elena whispered. "I can't just walk away." "You won't have to," Enzo said. "You already stopped being useful to him 3 weeks ago. I made sure of it." She stared at him, and for the first time since the night of that overheard call, Enzo watched something in her unclench, not relief exactly, but the first loosening of a grip she had been holding for longer than she could remember. She reached into the small clutch bag at her side and drew out the dried flower she carried everywhere, pressed flat and fragile inside a folded scrap of paper, and held it out to him without quite knowing why. "My mother grew these before she died," she said. "I've carried one everywhere since I was 15. I don't know why I'm showing you this." "I think you do," Enzo said quietly, and did not take it from her, only closed her fingers gently back around it. "Keep it. I don't need proof of what's real. I've watched you be real with everyone in my house except me for 4 months. I'd rather earn the rest of it than take it." Crane made his final move 3 weeks later, at the very benefit meant to announce Enzo and Elena's wedding date. He had learned, through channels Enzo had deliberately left open for exactly this purpose, that the funding for Sam's treatment had shifted, and he arrived at the gala already certain of how the evening would end. He waited until the toast, until the room was full of cameras and champagne and Chicago's better families, and then he raised his own glass and asked, with practiced sorrow, for a moment of everyone's attention. "Before we celebrate this union," Crane said, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom, "I think it's only fair the Bellini family understand exactly what they're marrying into. Miss Marchetti's father carries considerable debts. Debts that, I regret to say, led his daughter to some rather compromising arrangements to keep her brother's medical care afloat. I only raise it out of concern, for Enzo's sake, and for the sanctity of what should be an honest union." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when they sense a scandal about to unfold in real time. Enzo felt every eye in the ballroom shift toward Elena, watched her spine straighten the way it always did when the ground gave way beneath her, and understood this was the moment Crane had built the entire evening around. Elena did not wait for Enzo to speak for her. "Since Mr. Crane has decided to raise my family's private business in front of 300 strangers, Elena said, rising, her voice steady in a way that silenced the last of the murmuring, "allow me to finish the story he left out." She looked out at the room, not at Crane. "For the last 4 months, I sent Wallace Crane private information about the Bellini shipping operation. I want that on the record, because I'm the only one in this room brave enough to say it before he does it for me." A ripple moved through the crowd. Crane's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes went very still. "I did it," Elena continued, "because Mr. Crane held my father's gambling debt over my family, and used my 10-year-old brother's cancer treatment as the price for my silence and my cooperation. Every dollar of Sam's care for the last 4 months was leveraged in Wallace Crane's hands, used to turn a nurse who has spent her whole life caring for sick children into an informant against the one man who never once asked me for anything in return. She turned to look directly at Crane for the first time. "What you didn't count on, Wallace, is that I stopped being useful to you the moment Enzo made sure my brother's care no longer depended on you at all. I've had nothing to report in 3 weeks because there was nothing left for you to hold over me." Crane's composure cracked in a single, thin line across his mouth, the first honest expression the room had seen from him all evening. "This is a private family matter being dragged into public spectacle. You made it public the moment you stood up with a glass of champagne to announce it," Elena said. "I'm only finishing the sentence you started." It was an elderly woman at the next table, Mrs. Adeline Foy, a longtime patron of the very hospital wing bearing Crane's name, who rose slowly to her feet, leaning on her cane, and spoke into the silence that followed. "I've sat on that hospital's donor board for 11 years, Wallace," she said, her voice thin but caring. "I like copies of every foundation transaction touching that boy's account, first thing tomorrow morning. I have a feeling the board will find your name attached to considerably more than charity." Crane did not have an answer for that. For the first time in the years Enzo had known him, Wallace Crane simply had nothing left to say. The room did not erupt into chaos. It did something quieter and, in its own way, far more damning. Conversation resumed around Crane in careful, deliberate circles that no longer included him, phones already lifting to photograph the empty space where his easy smile used to sit. 2 days later, Sam was discharged from the hospital's inpatient wing for the first time in months, well enough for outpatient care alone. He met Enzo properly for the first time in the hospital's small garden courtyard, still thin from treatment but bright-eyed in a way that made Elena's breath catch every time he laughed. He studied Enzo with the frank, unfiltered attention only children seem to manage. "Elena says you're scary," Sam said. "You don't look that scary." "I get that a lot," Enzo said. "She also says you're the one who kept paying for my medicine even after Crane guy stopped being nice." Sam tilted his head. "That doesn't sound scary. That sounds like you're actually pretty okay." "It was such a small thing," said so plainly, that it landed harder than anything the trustees or the newspapers or even Crane himself had managed all month. Enzo did not have an answer ready. He only nodded, and something in his chest, guarded for longer than he could remember, settled quietly into place. The wedding, when it finally came, was small, a garden ceremony at the Bellini estate with Rosa seated in the front row and Sam serving, self-importantly, as ring bearer despite being technically too old for the job and insisting on it anyway. Elena wore no borrowed dress this time. She carried, tucked inside her bouquet where no camera would ever find it, the same pressed flower she had carried since she was 15, no longer a thing she hid but a thing she had finally chosen to keep in the light. Enzo Bellini had built an empire out of never needing anyone. Elena Marchetti had spent 4 months learning that survival didn't have to mean carrying every burden alone. And in the end, the truth that changed everything was never the one Wallace Crane tried to use as a weapon, it was the one Elena had been too afraid to say out loud until the night the hallway, and a man she hadn't meant to fall for, overheard exactly how much she'd been carrying by herself,